All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and joining today's webinar entitled Writing Fundamentals to Strengthen Science Communication. Quick housekeeping, if you've joined and you want to turn on your camera, that's awesome. Just please remember to keep your microphone muted unless you are asking a question. My name is Daniel Thompson, and I am proud to serve as the Professional Development Committee Chair for the CDC Employee Association of Emory Alumni. I'm a Health Communications Specialist in the Center for Forecasting and Outbreak Analytics on behalf of Gold Belt Professional Services. Joining me today is the Vice Chair of the Committee, Andrew Rainey, and our Rollins School of Public Health Staff Liaison, Michelle James, without whom none of this would be possible. The other people who we wouldn't be able to do this without are those joining us from the Rollins School of Public Health, who we will introduce in just a moment. So we want to make sure we thank them and let them know that we really appreciate their time and expertise today. If you're attending this webinar, you already know what I'm about to say, which is that there has never been a time in which public health communication is more important. The COVID-19 pandemic turned a bright light on the need for clear, consistent health communication anytime, but especially in times of crisis. Today's webinar aims to provide you with knowledge for how to be a better writer and strategies for getting there. For those attending today who are Emory alums, the CDC EAEA exists to be a connection point for Emory alums who work at CDC, be it as an FTE, CDC Foundation employee, or a contractor. We partner with CDC and other organizations to bring you pertinent programming, such as the event today, and also as a vehicle to share news and information about the university. If you are not on the CDC EAEA listserv and would like to be included, please let me know, and I will send you instructions to join, and I will put my email address in the chat. Speaking of updates from the university, Rollins has some very exciting news to share with everyone. This week, the Emory Board of Trustees approved a request from Rollins to start a DRPH degree program in the fall of 2025. That's a doctorate in public health. The online program will enroll 30 candidates in the first cohort who wish to focus on one of two tracks: evaluation and implementation science and emergency preparedness and response. So, if you've been delaying getting that terminal professional public health degree, now is your chance. At this time, I'd like to introduce our first presenter. Elizabeth Mendes is the Associate Dean for Communications at the Rollins School of Public Health. She brings more than 15 years of experience as a writer, editor, and content strategist. She has held numerous leadership positions at organizations, including the Southern Poverty Law Center, the American Cancer Society, and Gallup. She holds a master's degree in film and video from American University and a bachelor's degree in political science from the Ohio State University. Welcome, Elizabeth. And now I'd like to turn it over to Andrew to introduce our next presenter. Andrew?
Thank you, Daniel. My name is Andrew Rainey, as Daniel mentioned, Vice Chair of the Professional Development Committee. And I am currently a microbiologist at CDC with National Wastewater Surveillance. I graduated from Rollins in 2018 with my MPH in Environmental Health. I'd also like to plug Rollins for moving up in the U.S. News and World Rankings this year, up to number 3 for public health schools in the country. And I have the pleasure of introducing Kelly Jordan, who's the editorial director for the Rollins School of Public Health. Kelly is an award-winning writer and editor with a deep passion for impactful storytelling at Rollins. She oversees all editorial projects for the school, including the biannual Rollins magazine and digital content published in the Rollins News Center. Prior to coming to higher ed, Jordan worked as a writer and editor on a number of magazine staffs. Her byline has appeared in dozens of regional and national publications, including Atlanta Magazine, Redbook, Southern Living, Paste, and USA Today. She holds a master's degree in communication and a strategic communication certificate from Purdue University and a Bachelor of Arts in journalism with a magazine emphasis from the University of Georgia. And with that, I will gladly pass it over to our speakers for their presentation today.
Excellent. So nice to meet everyone. Thank you for those lovely introductions. As I said, I'm Elizabeth Mendes from the Rollins School of Public Health. I'm going to go ahead and get my screen sharing going. So just give me one moment with that so I can get that right. Alrighty. I believe I am sharing my slide deck. Daniel, give me an
Looks
okay.
great. Looks
Okay,
great. Yeah.
fantastic. Thank you. Always good to double check with somebody else on the line. So, really great to have so many people who are enthusiastic about hearing about science communication. Our team here at Rollins, our communication marketing team, is really passionate about it. And the Rollins School of Public Health is really investing a lot at this time in science communication. As Daniel went over, there has really never been a more important time. So what we wanted to talk about today is really just some of the fundamentals. I know my understanding is we might have a wide range of folks on this call. Some folks who work in writing and health comms every day, some folks who are maybe doing some more of the behind the scenes science and are looking at maybe growing their science writing skills. So some of what we cover, especially what I'm going to talk about in the beginning, some of the basics, maybe some things that some of you folks know inside and out. And so hopefully it's just something that's a good reminder. And for others, it may be an introduction to new concepts to you. So hopefully you'll stick with us on all of this. And then Kelly's going to get into some more of the storytelling and thinking about your audience pieces, which are always good reminders and good places to sharpen your skills. So we're just going to dive, as I said, into writing basics, identifying your audience, storytelling, and science writing. But as right before we dig into all of that, a couple reminders on why writing well matters. And just moving my boxes around so I can see my own. One is health literacy. And some of you may be very, very familiar with these facts, but for those who aren't, about 1 in 10 English-speaking adults in the US has proficient health literacy skills. And that really means that almost 9 out of 10 adults in the US have some sort of health literacy challenge. So we're talking about a lot of people who really need health information in a really straightforward manner. And that's something that impacts almost all of us. Another key reason, especially in a challenging, upcoming challenging election year, is misinformation. Misinformation and disinformation, the World Economic Forum recently said, is the most severe short-term risk that the world faces. I think all of you, at the CDC are familiar with the challenge of misinformation. And recent KFF surveys found that 96% of adults say they have heard at least 1 of 10 items of health-related misinformation that they surveyed about. And importantly, most of them were uncertain whether each of these 10 false claims in the survey were true or not. So why am I talking about health literacy, misinformation? The point is that when we write well, when we do a better job with our writing, and when we are more clear, especially when it comes to health information, our readers, our viewers of digital health information, are more likely to get the message and get the facts. So those are just a couple reminders. Again, a lot of you are familiar with these challenges we face, but a couple of reminders of why we're talking about what we're talking about today. And with that, let's get into the 5 top tips that I'm going to cover. These 5 top tips are pretty much pulling from The Elements of Style, the classic book that many of you know. I call it Back to Basics. If you don't have a copy, I highly suggest you get a copy. I couldn't find my copy as I was creating these slides. I had to borrow Kelly's copy. Thank you, Kelly. It's always a great book that has just really the basics that give you strong style, whether it's health writing or any other type of writing. So that's a lot of what I'm pulling from today. Number 1 tip in all kinds of writing is to write in active voice. The active voice is direct, it's bold, it is complete. The active voice is about how you construct your sentence. So it's a subject, verb, object construction. Importantly, and this can really be confusing to a lot of people, we're not talking about tense, present tense versus past tense. It is simply the construction of the sentence. An active voice is the opposite of passive voice. Passive voice, importantly, almost always leaves out the who, so the subject. So I have pulled out an example, one that you can take a look at. I've bolded the passive part, and we can see, you can think in your mind how to make it active. This is from a recent MMWR. There's a few challenges in this sentence, and I know that the MMWR, this is scientific writing, of course, so there's a lot to think about there. You're not necessarily always writing an active voice for maybe a variety of reasons. But here you see the sentence, monitoring is performed either through direct daily contact by state or local health departments or by providing persons with information on how to self-monitor and where to seek testing. So I'm already personally getting a little lost in this sentence because it's not constructed in this subject, verb, object construction that we talked about. So if we go ahead and let's fix it, and I've bolded the subject, verb, object construction, I went ahead and moved the subject, at least of the first part of this a little bit of a lengthy sentence, to the beginning. Being state or local health departments, they are the subject who is doing the monitoring. They are monitoring exposed persons. So it makes it clearer about who is doing the monitoring and who they are monitoring. Now, I will say in terms of this sentence in particular, I think there's some other things that we could fix, and we could break this sentence apart. And if there's anyone on the line who worked on this MMWR, I'm sure you maybe have some other reasons for why this came out the way that it did. But again, when you work in active voice and you follow the subject, verb, object, sentence construction, it just makes it clearer about who is doing the action and who is the object of that action. So that's number one. Number two is to use active verbs. Active verbs are concrete, they're clear, they are precise verbs that name specific actions that people take. So here I just want to dive into the example. We can think about how to fix this. We are thinking. Our thinking is less active, more hesitant. We are thinking that these results will be helpful in future policy decisions. If we want to fix this, we can just say we think. Think is active, it's clear, precise. We think these results will help in future policy decisions. Another really important one, again from Elements of Style, is to put your statements in the positive form. Positive form is using direct language, really avoiding language that is evasive or hesitant. And importantly, it's telling your audience what is rather than what is not. And I'm giving you just a few examples here. So instead of saying not important, you will say irrelevant. Instead of saying do not have much confidence in, you could say distrusted. Instead of saying do not agree, you could say disagree. And again, we can jump into an example. Let's put this in positive form. Programs in these 28 jurisdictions have not yet met the national performance target. This is also a recent example pulled from TB-related information from the CDC website. So have not yet met, you have a lot of words in there. It's not in the positive form. We could say fail to meet. Programs in these 28 jurisdictions failed to meet the national performance target. It's in the positive form, and it's just more direct and clear. This one I put in quotes because this is actually from a famous George Orwell essay. And he had a number of tips in there. One of them being never use a long word where a short one will do. Many of you have probably heard this or read that famous essay. And the point is with this, I think, very clear, but of course, we all know some of the best literature uses the simplest language, and by using language that your audience will understand, you will be able to better communicate your points. A lot of this comes across in the health literacy tips that, of course, the CDC talks about quite a bit as well, and I know Kelly's going to talk a little bit about in addition. So this is a sentence that we made up for fun, but let's fix it and use a short word. Subsequently, we investigated whether the newly synthesized compound would alleviate queasiness. A lot of long words in there. I'm sure there are many ways we could think of shortening this. One way is to simply say next. That's one way we shortened it, and we did a few other things. Next, we studied whether the new medication would help reduce nausea. You can see how using the simpler, shorter words simply make it clear. This can be true when you're talking about basic health information for the public, but also when you're talking about even scientific publications for other academics. Everybody appreciates clear, concise language that's easier to read. Tip number 5, to round things out here, is to cut jargon and needless words. I know that you have a lot of acronyms and terms at the CDC that are near and dear to your heart. And so this may be a tough one for you, but writing should be concise. We should avoid unnecessary words. Of course, it doesn't mean all sentences need to be short. Certainly, you don't want every sentence to be the exact same length. It's good to vary length to keep things moving. But we also want to avoid terms that only a specific profession or specific group, if you will, uses that may be difficult for the public to understand. I'm sure this is something that a lot of folks on this call maybe struggle with, and maybe can be a point sometimes of frustration if you're especially on the writing side trying to deal with other folks on your team or in other positions when you're trying to argue with why we shouldn't include a specific term, acronym, piece of jargon, especially when communicating with the public. But it's always good to continue to advocate for that simpler term. Here's another fun example where we can try and cut the jargon out. This sentence: quantitative analysis of the data elucidated a possible underlying positive feedback dynamic between the variables. I can tell you I have read many more convoluted sentences than this in many, many scientific journals. We can simply cut a lot of that jargon and simplify. Results show a possible self-strengthening cycle between these elements. Of course, you could rewrite this sentence in a number of different ways, but it's simply to show you that when you simplify, it just makes it easier for your brain to process the information. So with that, those were my 5 top tips. These are straightforward. As I said, many of you may be very familiar with them. And for those of you who are new to some of these concepts, again, I encourage you to pick up a copy of The Elements of Style and dig into it because there are a lot of other great tips in there. With that, I can pause, see if anybody had any quick questions about any of my 5 top tips before we dive into what Kelly's going to talk about. Seems like we might be ready to roll on to On to you, Kelly. So
Okay.
I'm gonna stop sharing.
All right. Give me just a second. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So in my job, so I'm editorial director at Rollins. So I spend a lot of time every single day thinking about messaging. And regardless of what all of your roles are individually, I would assume you're also thinking about messaging, whether you are specifically a communicator or not. You're communicating with your teams, you're composing emails, you're thinking of how to convey information. Research, but also our own lived experiences have shown us that storytelling is an effective tool for delivering content, driving behavior changes, and communicating messages, because it helps people see themselves in relation to the content and kind of make sense of the information being conveyed. People also just really enjoy a good story. I'll turn on my video for you. But before we get into the storytelling component, I want to talk a bit about audience, but because before we develop our message, we have to think about who we're actually talking to. So sometimes you might know this information, sometimes you might just be assuming it, but we have to look at their education level. What is their reading level? What is their literacy level? Income may come into factor, prior knowledge on the subject, assumptions, core beliefs, cultural norms, communication platform. Are they a native English speaker? Are we speaking to someone from a different population, a different country? Would a sensitivity reader be helpful in this scenario? And then communication platform. So how will we be delivering this content? Will it be through a speech? Will it be an email? Will it be a long form feature story? Will it be an infographic? Keeping all of these things in mind will help us know what type of communication to prepare to our intended audience. And then also, you might have feedback from your audience in terms of what they want and how they want to receive information. Now, for us at Rollins, a lot of our content for the Rollins News Center, but also for our magazine, is catered to a very specific educated audience with at least a college degree, but most also have a graduate degree or an MPH from Rollins. We also target a lot of our content toward the general public with an interest in science. And that content also is with people with at least a high school diploma. However, this isn't necessarily what all of the United States looks like. In fact, the average US adult is actually at the 8th grade reading level, and more than 130 million people lack proficiency in literacy. So they're reading below the equivalent of a 6th grader or about an 11-year-old. When we're looking at opportunities for conveying information, this kind of goes back to what Elizabeth was talking to in terms of using the active voice, using short sentences, and soon I'll be talking about plain language as well. People are mainly digesting content digitally, right? They're reading it quickly, they're scanning information. In doing so, there's a lot of room for misinterpretation, misinformation to occur, and for main points to get lost, especially if you're writing very lengthy sentences with a lot of what you're trying to say. One of the important points that I wanted to pull out here is that 94% of journalists actually rely on social media for their jobs. So it's still all these different digital platforms are opportunities for all of us as public health people to share messages with a varied audience. And then, as we can all assume, this is from Pew Research Center, younger generations, social media does prevail as a way for younger people to get content, get news. and get information. So the Plain Language Act was passed in 2010. That's something that CDC follows with their Office of Communication, other federal agencies as well, and producing content aimed at general audiences, the general public. And again, we're looking largely at people at an 8th grade reading level. And something I really want to emphasize here is when you're writing in plain language, this is not dumbing it down. It's writing smarter. It's actually more difficult as a writer. And I know that Elizabeth can attest to this as well. And many of you, it's often way more difficult to simplify what you're trying to say, to be direct, to be succinct, to use words that people can understand. Because our main goal at the end of the day is to influence, to share information, and to help people, right? So we want to make sure that our message comes across and that our efforts are worth the time that we've invested. So some basic principles related to plain language: using the active voice, explaining complicated ideas simply, easier said than done, right? Shortening our sentences and simplifying sentence structure. So instead of several in dashes and m dashes and semicolons, we're talking a few words and then a period. You know, if you have a complicated idea that demands a run-on sentence with a lot of sentences or a lot of commas, I would encourage you to try to rephrase that and break it up into a few different sentences. Since we are writing largely for the web and for digital platforms, avoid those big blocks of content. You know, if you have a lot of ideas that fall under the same bucket, consider incorporating devices like bullets, lists, things that are scannable so that your content actually gets read. Let's see. And then consider utilizing infographics. Something else that I would add here that is related is anytime that you're preparing any content, have someone else read it over. If it's, you know, an article that you're writing for CDC's website, if it's certainly a speech you're delivering, if you're writing on behalf of another person at your agency, have another reader, and certainly read your own work multiple times. All right, now, as I previously alluded, so in my job, I'm a storyteller. I know that's kind of like a cringy word, but that's a lot of what I'm doing day to day. You might argue that there's not a place for that in inter-office communication, but you probably do a lot of these things already. And I kind of just wanted to speak to some opportunities that you have in utilizing different storytelling tools. So I just wanted to pause for a minute and pose the question to you all in the chat. If you could answer what makes for a good story. What are some of the main components that make for a good story? If anyone wants to share some ideas. Or if no one wants to, that's also fine. Characters, relatability, tension, good plot. A story that speaks to my experience. Tone, yes, excellent. Looking here, yeah, it's really important to know why now, why today, why should I care, and how does this relate to my life? That's why people are reading the content. That's why you're writing to them in the first place, is because you want people to do something and to connect. When there's a disconnection between content and audience, it's just a waste of effort, at least in my opinion. We need to know who are the characters, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. A lot of times in public health, the villain is the virus, right? The characters are the people. What are the stakes? If you don't get a vaccine, you might get sick. We don't want that to happen, right? What is your plot? What is it that you're trying to say? So there are a bunch of different literary devices that we can use to our disposal. So certainly if you're doing a long form feature story, so in a magazine like I operate, it's easier to incorporate a lot of these things, but I would say that you also probably can use these in a range of different avenues, including presentations, infographics. I know CDC does several educational materials aimed at the general public. I'm going to show a couple of examples of those here in a minute. Titles, headlines always lend themselves to rhyme, alliteration, assonance, and then also I think speeches as well are an excellent use for these different devices. They not only strengthen the writing, they also make them more pleasing to the ear. So if you're, which is also a consideration for people under the American Disabilities Act, if they're hearing content versus reading it, it's nice to keep that in mind. Like, what is the musicality of what you're trying to convey? So this is an example. Russ McClendon, one of our writers, is just a really excellent writer. And I'm going to show you two of his articles that he's done for us recently for Rollins magazine. So here, I just wanted to highlight a couple of the different subheaders across the navigation. We've got exposing the exposome. Let's see, history, mystery, eyes in the sky. So already we have some rhyme in there, some internal rhyme, alliteration. And I'm just going to read the intro here briefly. On weekday afternoons, Atlanta's downtown connector is an incredibly unpleasant place. Immediately, we know where we are. As Atlantans, we can picture it, right? Throngs of vehicles congregate to grumble together in the sun, spewing noxious fumes as they inch along. Drivers and passengers gaze helplessly through the hydrocarbon haze. So just with that introduction, we are immediately in the story. We know where we are. We know why today. We know what the setting is, and we have an idea for what this article is going to be about and why we should care. This is another one from the same writer. This was about industrial waste. Decades of industrial waste that have been occurring in Brunswick, Georgia, and the research that Rollins faculty are doing there with community partners in Brunswick to help mitigate the effects of decades of industrial pollution. So, and again, take a look at the headers at the top, the burden of Brunswick, results and reactions. They're just catchy. So Anita Collins is angry. Throughout her hometown of Brunswick, a historic port city nestled among salt marshes on the Georgia coast, friends and neighbors are struggling with cancer, kidney disease, autoimmune conditions, and other serious health problems. Collins, like many in Brunswick, suspects there are more than just isolated illnesses. She's worried there are signs of a deeper danger plaguing her city. And she's mad so little has been done. It is painful. I'm angry. And for so long, nobody's really given a darn, says Collins. So immediately we have our setting, we have our why today, we have a why should we care? We can put ourselves in Anita's place, right? We can picture what that would feel like. And we know what's at stake, these serious, deadly health problems, right? CDC does this too. And see, we could do this in the form of an infographic as well. So the message here is very clear. A flu vaccine can take flu from wild to mild. So you still may get sick, but it won't be as bad. So it's saying that very directly with plain language, but we also have a visual representation. It's funny, it's catchy, it's bold. We get the point, right? At Rollins, as I mentioned, our audience tends to have a college degree, but also often a graduate degree as well. Many on our social media channel are members of the general public who are just very interested in science, but may not have an MPH. So we have this extra educational opportunity at our hands. This was one of the posts that we produced that really got heavy engagement, over 4,000 likes, a ton of questions that we were able to respond to and directly engage with our audience to answer questions and help encourage testing, right? So the whole point of this was to answer the question, like, do our COVID rapid tests still work? Yes, they do. And we're saying this, with a lot of visual support. And then this is the last one. Sorry, my screen is doing something strange. So if my parent has Alzheimer's disease, will I have it too? So NIH had some really excellent resources on their website on a range of different public health topics, as does CDC. This one was really interesting to me. I loved the way that they utilized illustrations to help support their information. Everything is shared in plain language. It's explained in a way that makes sense. I also get the sense that they likely vetted different questions based on what they're either receiving from CDC Info's line, or that they're receiving from general feedback from just healthcare professionals who have told them what their patients want. All of those things could possibly inform how they've conveyed this information. This was a related page. So if you don't have access to a Canva account or an Illustrator, this is also an example of how they're sharing that information and how you can share information as well. Everything is structured the way that I talked about, with bullets, lists, simple sentence construction, plain language basics. And with that, I'm going to end my portion, but I wanted to share a few of the different resources that I really love and that Elizabeth does as well. Several of those, as you can see, are from CDC, which has several different websites devoted to communications. I love this book, Eats, Shoots, and Leaves. This in itself is just an example of how the serial comma can lead to, or absence of it can lead to, some confusion. Honor and Respect is one that actually I was doing a contract with CDC for a while, and one of my colleagues there really recommended that book. It's useful with honorific titles, when you're writing different messages to Congress people or people with different honorifics, the best way to address them. So I will stop sharing my screen here. And again, we're happy to share this slide deck with you all.
Awesome presentation. Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Kelly. That was really, really good information. I did have one quick question. I was recently turned on to a book called Smart Brevity, written by the creators of Axios. And I've read most of it. It is a pretty quick read for those who might be interested. But I was wondering if you might comment about the utility of smart brevity in health communication. Is it a little bit too far in the direction of brief, maybe without enough detail or storytelling? And would you recommend it to this group as a resource?
I'm glad you brought that up, and we can certainly add that to our resource list. I'm a big fan of smart brevity as well, and we actually use a tool for our email and newsletters called Axios HQ, which was created by the company Axios, which was started by the folks who wrote the book Smart Brevity. So the tool itself incorporates within it a lot of the smart brevity principles in the way it sort of suggests that you write your email newsletters, if you will. So a lot of the it's a lot of the concepts that we talked about for digital writing as well, with bullet points, with breaking up text, with adding a lot of they call them axioms, but a lot of the little sort of like pre-headers to text. So like bottom line, or what this means, or go deeper, those kinds of things, which I I think they talk about in smart brevity. So I think you have to make sure that the way you apply smart brevity makes sense for your audience's reading level. But I think that it's a great book to pick up and can definitely make a lot of sense for health communication. It's a great question and a great book.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else on the call, feel free to come off mute or put a question in the chat. We've got a few more minutes, so if anybody has any burning questions or comments, please feel free to jump right in. Andrew, Michelle, if y'all have anything to add, also feel free to jump in.
Hi, my name is Tavia. I'm from CDC. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. My question is on like communicating on the unknown. So how would you recommend kind of talking about that if you don't have all the data or still piecing together the whole story kind of in like a recurring basis on like a newsletter or on a site where you're updating data? How do you communicate on the unknown? Thank you so much.
I think that's a really excellent question. And I think I'll do my best in replying to that in a way that's not too convoluted. I think it's really, really, really important not to work in a vacuum. So when this happens to all of us in public health at work, it happens to Elizabeth and I all the time as well, where we're waiting for information. So an important thing to do immediately is to brainstorm with your team, talk about what you do know, and pull together a communication plan, even if that plan is to share, we know this, we're still working on finding this, right? So even if you don't have all the details yet, sharing that you acknowledge whatever the scenario is that's occurring in a way that's thoughtful. I know we're weighing being fast with being accurate. I would say that being accurate is always most important, even if it takes you a day longer. And if it is taking that day longer, acknowledging we understand people are anxious to hear updates on X. We're working hard to learn this. And then keeping it brief, sharing what you know, and sharing next steps, as well as when you will be sharing an update or when you might have more information is what I would say. I don't know if Elizabeth wants to add to that.
Yeah, I would agree. And just also, especially for the web, the importance, I think you hit on this, Kelly, of dates, like being clear when something was last updated. I think you all at the CDC, I know you recently redesigned your site, but just being really clear, making sure when someone visits a web page or a news release, they can see what the date of it is without missing it, or if you're going to be updating that page, when it was last updated. And as Kelly mentioned, if it's going to be something where you're producing regular updates to it, like it's an ongoing issue, like with bird flu or something, be clear when you plan to update it next, or that there's going to be ongoing updates and how someone can subscribe or where they can go for ongoing updates. Does that help answer your question?
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's very great. Thank you so much for sharing.
Sure. I see another hand.
Hi, my name is Jane Mitchko, and I actually work in the Office of Communications at CDC. And I really enjoyed your presentation. I think you guys did a great job. And I wanted to let you know that we actually have training that follows many of the principles that you all shared today, which including, and I really appreciate Kelly calling us out in terms of following the Plain Language Act and using plain language principles, because we really strive to do that in everything we do, and getting the messages out to CDC. So this training was developed last year, And we just got it out publicly or through CDC Train. So it's open to anyone now. And I was going to put the link in the chat, but definitely follows almost all the principles that you guys share. So that's great news. And I really wanted to thank you guys for your presentation. Oh,
Excellent.
and I would love to follow up with you guys in terms of some ideas that I've been thinking about in terms of how we could collaborate. We actually have the Health Marketing Conference coming up next July. I was thinking that perhaps we could collaborate there, getting more students involved and things like that. So I'd love to get your contact information and follow up with you all on a couple of ideas I had.
Well, that sounds great all around. And even in discussions and creating this workshop content, we talked about making sure we were in alignment with, and we had an understanding that CDC had great training content as well on science communication. So,
and what's so interesting, and here's a question: science communication versus the language we use is communication science. So, why do you use science communication?
I think popularity of the term for us, and that's just what is sort of catching on out there. But that's a great question, and one we can certainly put some more thought into.
Yeah. And then the last thing I thought of, one thing that we emphasize in our training and to all folks at CDC is collaboration among scientists, communicators, and policy staff here on any project, including, writing, obviously, but wondered about your thoughts if you all emphasize that at Rollins.
We absolutely do. So we work with our different faculty members anytime that they do have research publications coming out. If I'm writing up a news brief or someone else on our team we're working directly with that faculty member to review the content, but also to make sure that their talking points make sense to people outside of public health, to a public audience. We also offer a variety of different trainings to our faculty related to media training, but also just developing their messaging.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed meeting you guys.
All right, last call for questions or comments. Anyone? All right, hearing none. Very good, everybody. Thank you so much for attending. And yes, as has been noted in the chat several times, we'll be sharing the recording and the slides with everybody. So just want to thank Elizabeth and Kelly again very much for taking their time today and sharing their expertise with us. And we'll look forward to following up with everybody very soon. Thank you all very much.